Waitress corrects billionaire's order in French, he freezes in shock. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Café Laurent, casting golden streaks across worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs. This wasn't the kind of place you'd find in glossy travel magazines, no Instagram-worthy latte art or trendy exposed brick walls. Just honest coffee, fresh pastries, and the gentle hum of conversation that made it feel like a slice of Paris had somehow found its way to a quiet corner of Manhattan. Claire Dubois moved between the tables with practiced grace, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a warm smile greeting each customer. At 26, she had been working at Café Laurent for 3 years, and while others might see just another waitress in a black apron, there was something different about Claire. The way she switched effortlessly between English and French with the elderly Monsieur Beaumont, how she helped the Italian businessman with his pronunciation, the Spanish novels she read during her breaks, languages were her secret passion, her escape from the routine of order pads and coffee pots. The café was settling into its familiar rhythm when the door chimed, and everything seemed to shift. The man who entered commanded attention without saying a word. His charcoal gray suit was tailored to perfection, his leather shoes gleamed with the kind of shine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his silver hair was styled with meticulous precision. But it wasn't just his appearance, it was the way he carried himself, like someone accustomed to having doors opened for him, literally and figuratively. Richard Blackwood. Even those who didn't recognize his face knew the name. His tech empire had revolutionized 3 industries, his net worth was discussed in financial news segments, and his rare public appearances made headlines. Yet here he was, sliding into a corner table at a modest café. Checking his Patek Philippe watch with the subtle impatience of a man whose time was worth thousands of dollars per minute. Claire approached his table, notepad ready, treating him exactly as she would any other customer. "Good morning, what can I get started for you today?" Richard barely glanced up from his phone, his voice carrying the crisp authority of boardroom presentations. "Coffee, black. And one of those." He gestured vaguely toward the pastry display, then attempted what he clearly thought was sophisticated French, "un croissant au chocolat, s'il vous plaît." The words hung in the air, and Claire felt something stir within her. It wasn't just that he'd mispronounced it, though chocolate should have been chocolate with that soft French ending. It was the casual arrogance, the assumption that throwing around a few French words would impress the help. She'd seen it before, businessmen trying to show off their worldliness while butchering beautiful languages. For a moment, Claire hesitated. She could simply nod, bring him what he wanted, and let it slide. That's what he expected. That's what most people would do when faced with someone so clearly powerful, so obviously unaccustomed to being corrected. But something about his dismissive tone, the way he hadn't even looked at her when ordering, sparked a flame of quiet rebellion. "Certainly," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "Un pain au chocolat, c'est." The correction was soft, almost musical, but unmistakably present. She pronounced each word with the fluid beauty of native French, her accent revealing depths he hadn't bothered to notice before. The effect was immediate and startling. Richard's head snapped up, his phone forgotten in his hand. His steel-gray eyes, which had been scanning emails with mechanical efficiency, suddenly focused on her with laser intensity. The color seemed to drain from his face, and for a moment, just a moment, the billionaire mask slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. The café fell into an odd sort of hush. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted, as if the entire room sensed something significant had just occurred. Other patrons glanced over, some recognizing the famous face, others simply picking up on the sudden tension that crackled between the waitress and the well-dressed stranger. Richard's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His fingers, which had been dancing across his phone screen with practiced efficiency, now gripped the device like an anchor. The confidence that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a furnace flickered and dimmed. Here was a man who had stared down corporate raiders, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, who had built an empire on his ability to read people and situations, and a simple correction from a café waitress had left him speechless. Claire watched his reaction with growing concern and curiosity. She had expected perhaps embarrassment, maybe irritation at being corrected by someone he clearly considered beneath his notice. But this was something else entirely. This was recognition, pain, and something that looked almost like fear dancing across his features. Richard started, then stopped. His voice, usually so commanding, came out as barely more than a whisper. The business mogul who gave interviews to financial networks without breaking a sweat was struggling to form words. The silence stretched between them, loaded with unspoken questions and unexpected vulnerability. Other customers began to stare more openly now, sensing drama unfolding in their quiet morning refuge. Claire found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the mystery of why two simple French words could unravel someone so completely. Richard's hands were trembling now, almost imperceptibly, but Claire's eye for detail caught the movement. This wasn't embarrassment. This was something much deeper, much more personal. Her correction had somehow reached past his armor and touched something he kept carefully hidden from the world. Richard struggled to reassemble his composure, running a hand through his silver hair, a gesture that somehow made him look younger and more vulnerable than his 52 years. The mask of control was sliding back into place, but cracks remained visible, like fault lines in expensive marble. Of course, he managed, his voice still not quite steady. "Pain au chocolat." He pronounced it carefully this time, as if testing foreign words on his tongue. But even as he spoke, Claire could see him fighting some internal battle, his jaw clenched with the effort of maintaining his equilibrium. She should have walked away then, taken his order and retreated to the safety of professional distance. Instead, something in his expression, a flicker of old pain, quickly suppressed, made her linger. "Your French is actually quite good," she offered gently, recognizing his struggle and trying to ease the tension. "Just a small pronunciation difference. Are you studying the language?" The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His carefully controlled features contorted briefly, and for just an instant, Claire saw not the billionaire tech mogul but something else, a little boy, perhaps, lost and hurting. The transformation was so sudden and complete that she took an involuntary step back. "No," Richard said, the word coming out too sharp, too quick. "I don't. I haven't spoken French in." He trailed off, seeming to catch himself before revealing too much. His business training was reasserting itself, teaching him to reveal nothing, admit no weakness. But Claire had spent 3 years reading people across cafe tables. She'd served heartbroken lovers, celebrating families, lonely elderly customers who came in just to hear another human voice. She'd learned to recognize pain in all its forms, and right now, it was radiating from Richard Blackwood in waves. The other customers were beginning to lose interest, returning to their conversations and newspapers, but Claire remained focused on the man before her. His expensive suit couldn't hide the way his shoulders had drawn in protectively, the way his breathing had become shallow and controlled. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to upset you. I love languages. Sometimes I correct people automatically. It's a terrible habit." Richard's laugh came out bitter and hollow. "Love languages." He repeated her words as if they were foreign concepts. "When did you learn French?" "I've been studying it since I was 12, Claire replied, settling into the familiar territory of conversation. "Started with Spanish, then French, picked up some Italian and Portuguese along the way. I always dreamed of traveling, maybe working as a translator someday." She gestured around the modest cafe with a self-deprecating smile. "Life had other plans, I suppose." "A translator." Richard's voice was strange now, distant. His eyes had taken on that unfocused quality of someone lost in memory. "My mother." The words escaped before he could stop them, and immediately his expression hardened, walls slamming back into place. But Claire had heard it, that brief, unguarded moment when his voice had gone soft with something that might have been love, or loss, or both. The mystery deepened, and despite her better judgment, she found herself drawn into whatever story lay hidden beneath his polished surface. She spoke French? Claire asked gently, instinctively knowing she was treading on dangerous ground but unable to resist. Richard's jaw worked silently for a long moment. Around them, the café continued its morning routine, coffee brewing, pastries being arranged, the soft clink of ceramic and silverware. But at their small table, time seemed suspended. She was French, he finally admitted, the word seeming to cost him something. Born in Lyon. She. Again he stopped himself, but this time Claire could see the war being waged behind his eyes, the desire to speak warring with years of practiced silence. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, though the edges remained frustratingly blurred. This powerful man, this titan of industry who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, had been undone by 2 words in his mother's native tongue. There was a story here, Claire realized, probably a painful one. She wanted to ask more, but something in his posture warned her off. Instead, she simply waited, letting the silence stretch between them like a bridge he could choose to cross or burn. Richard seemed to be fighting with himself, his hands now flat on the table, pressing down as if he could anchor himself to the present moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. She used to correct my French exactly like that. The words hung between them, heavy with decades of buried grief. Claire felt her heart clench with unexpected sympathy for this man she'd judged so harshly just moments before. Behind the arrogance and power, behind the expensive suits and dismissive manner, was someone who had lost his mother and never quite learned how to carry that loss. She must have been a wonderful teacher, Claire said softly. Richard's smile was heartbreaking in its sadness. She tried to be. But I was angry then. 15 years old and convinced I knew everything. I refused to speak French with her those last few years. Said it was embarrassing, that we lived in America now and should speak English. His voice cracked slightly. I broke her heart, and I was too proud and stupid to see it. The confession seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Richard Blackwood, the man who gave nothing away in interviews, who played his cards so close to his chest that competitors couldn't read his next move, had just revealed something painfully personal to a waitress he'd met 5 minutes ago. Claire felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She'd been so quick to judge him, to see only the arrogant businessman throwing around French words to impress the staff. She hadn't seen the lost boy underneath, still carrying the weight of words he could never take back. She knew you loved her, Claire said with quiet certainty. Mothers always know. Richard looked up at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since entering the café. His expression was raw, unguarded, and for a moment the years fell away from his face. Do they? He asked, and the question held the vulnerability of a child seeking absolution. Trust me, Claire replied. They do. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Then, as if remembering where he was, Richard seemed to pull himself back together. But something fundamental had shifted. The arrogant customer had been replaced by someone more human, more real. I should get that coffee, Claire said finally, sensing his need for space to process what had just passed between them. Wait, Richard said as she turned to go. Could you sit with me? Just for a few minutes. I know you're working, but... He gestured helplessly, a billionaire reduced to hoping a waitress might spare him a moment of her time. Claire glanced around the café. The morning rush had passed, leaving only a handful of regulars who could wait a few extra minutes for their refills. Her manager was in the back office, lost in paperwork as usual. And something in Richard's expression, hope mixed with desperate vulnerability, made the decision for her. Let me get your coffee first, she said. Then we can talk. As she walked toward the coffee station, Claire felt the weight of curious eyes following her. Word would spread quickly through the café's regular crowd, the waitress who had somehow managed to crack the armor of one of the most powerful men in the city. But for once, she didn't care about gossip or speculation. Behind her, Richard sat alone at his table, staring at his hands and trying to understand how a simple correction had unraveled 37 years of careful emotional control. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air around him, but all he could think about was his mother's voice, speaking to him in the language he'd rejected, the language that had just brought her memory flooding back with devastating clarity. When Claire returned with his coffee and pain au chocolate, properly pronounced this time, she found him looking out the window with an expression of such profound sadness that her heart ached for him. Without a word, she slid into the seat across from him, her presence an invitation to continue a conversation that had already gone deeper than either of them had expected. "Tell me about her," Claire said simply. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "Marguerite Dubois," he said, and Claire started at hearing her own last name. "She met my father when he was stationed in Lyon after the war. American soldier, French seamstress, it was like something out of a movie." "Dubois," Claire repeated softly. "That's my last name too." Richard's eyes widened. "Really? Maybe we're distantly related." For the first time since entering the cafe, he almost smiled. She would have liked that coincidence. She always believed in signs, in connections that went deeper than chance. What was she like? "Beautiful," Richard said without hesitation. "Not just physically, though she was that too. She had this way of making everything feel more meaningful, more alive. She could turn a simple dinner into a celebration, a walk in the rain into an adventure. She saw magic everywhere." His voice grew softer, more reflective. "I think that's what I lost when she died. The ability to see magic in ordinary things." Claire found herself leaning forward, drawn into his story. "How old were you when she passed?" 17. The word came out flat, matter of fact, but Claire could hear the grief underneath. "Cancer. It took her quickly, which the doctors said was a mercy. But there was nothing merciful about watching her fade away, about knowing I'd wasted 2 years being embarrassed by her accent, by the French lullabies she hummed while cooking." The pain in his voice was palpable now, years of suppressed grief finally finding voice. Claire reached across the table instinctively, her fingers brushing his hand in a gesture of comfort. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. "She kept trying to teach me, you know," Richard continued. "Even when I was being awful, even when I rolled my eyes and complained. She'd slip French phrases into conversation, correct my pronunciation with infinite patience. 'Pain au chocolat, mon chéri,' she'd say. 'The chocolate doesn't need the extra syllable, it's sweet enough already.'" Claire felt her throat tighten. "That's what I said to you." Exactly what she would have said. Richard's smile was heartbreaking. For a moment, sitting here, it was like she was in the room again. Like she was still trying to teach me, even after all these years. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of connection and coincidence settling between them. Around them, the cafe hummed with quiet activity, but their corner felt separate from the world, a small pocket of shared understanding. "I built everything to make her proud," Richard said suddenly. "Every company, every success, every dollar earned, it was all for her. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that what she really wanted was for me to be happy. To find joy in small things. To speak her language, not because it was useful or impressive, but because it connected me to her memory." Claire squeezed his hand gently. "It's not too late. You could learn again. Properly this time, with respect instead of embarrassment." Richard looked at her then with something approaching wonder. "You know, in all my years of business, through every negotiation and every deal, no one has ever talked to me the way you just did. Not about success or strategy or profit margins. About what matters." "Maybe they were afraid to," Claire suggested. "When someone has your kind of power, people tend to tell you what they think you want to hear." "And what do you think I want to hear?" Claire considered the question seriously. "I think you want someone to tell you that your mother would be proud of who you've become, but also that it's okay to be more than just successful. It's okay to be human." The observation hit its target with devastating accuracy. Richard felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd wrapped around his heart so tightly he'd forgotten they were there. "I want to offer you something," he said suddenly, his business instincts reasserting themselves but tempered now with genuine respect. "I'm expanding into European markets, and I need someone who understands not just languages but cultures. Someone who can navigate the subtleties of international communication." Claire's eyes widened. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to use your gifts properly. To travel, to work as that translator you dreamed of becoming. The position would be based in Paris, at least initially. You'd be working directly with me on projects that could shape how companies communicate across cultural boundaries." The offer hung in the air between them, massive and life-changing and utterly unexpected. Claire felt her pulse quicken, her mind racing through possibilities she'd thought were forever out of reach. I can't just leave everything," she said, but even as the words came out, she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "My life is here. This job, my apartment, my routine." "Your routine," Richard repeated gently. "Is that really living, or is it just surviving?" The question stung because it was so accurate. Claire looked around the cafe, at the familiar tables and regular customers, at the life she'd built that was comfortable and safe and utterly predictable. Then she looked back at Richard, this complicated man who had walked into her ordinary morning and turned everything upside down. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire any number of qualified translators, people with degrees and experience and proper credentials." "Because you corrected me," Richard said simply. "Not to show off, not to prove how smart you are, but because you respected the language enough to want it spoken properly. Because when I was falling apart in front of you, you didn't try to fix me or flatter me or run away. You just listened. You saw me as human." Claire felt tears building behind her eyes. "This is crazy. We've known each other for 20 minutes. The craziest decisions often turn out to be the best ones," Richard replied. "My mother used to say that life is like a river, you can stand on the bank and watch it flow by, or you can jump in and let it carry you somewhere new. And if I drown? Then at least you'll have tried to swim." The metaphor settled between them, rich with possibility and risk. Claire thought about her dreams of travel, of using her language skills for something meaningful, of breaking free from the safe but limiting boundaries of her current life. Then she thought about the fear, the uncertainty, the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. "I need time to think," she said finally. Richard nodded, pulling a business card from his wallet. But instead of handing it to her immediately, he took out an expensive pen and wrote something on the back. "My personal number," he said, sliding the card across the table. "Not my assistant's number, not a corporate line. Mine. Call me when you've decided." Claire took the card, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of his name. "What if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision and remember this morning as one of the most meaningful conversations I've had in years." Richard's smile was genuine now, warmed by something that hadn't been there when he'd first walked through the cafe's doors. "But I hope you'll say yes. I think we could do something remarkable together." He stood then, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a coffee and pastry that cost less than 10. "Keep the change," he said when Claire started to protest. "Consider it payment for a French lesson that was worth far more than money." As he walked toward the door, Richard paused and turned back. "Oh, and Claire. My mother would have adored you. She always said the best people are the ones who correct you with kindness." Then he was gone, leaving Claire alone with his business card, a generous tip, and a decision that could change the entire trajectory of her life. She sat in the empty chair he'd vacated, staring at the card and trying to process everything that had just happened. Around her, the cafe was returning to its normal rhythm. Customers came and went, orders were taken and filled, the familiar dance of service industry life continued unchanged. But Claire felt fundamentally altered, as if Richard's presence had shifted something in her molecular structure. She thought about his mother, Marguerite Dubois, the French seamstress who had seen magic in ordinary things. She thought about Richard, the lost boy hiding inside the successful businessman, still seeking his mother's approval and forgiveness after all these years. And she thought about herself, Claire Dubois, the waitress with a gift for languages and dreams she'd let gather dust. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate asking about weekend plans, and suddenly Claire realized how small her world had become. Safe, yes. Predictable, certainly. But also limited in ways she'd been afraid to acknowledge. She looked at Richard's business card again, at his personal number written in confident handwriting on the back. Paris. International projects. A chance to use her skills for something meaningful. It was everything she'd dreamed of and everything she'd convinced herself was impossible. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like a recognition of something that had always been true. She'd been waiting for someone to see her potential, to offer her a chance to be more than she was. But maybe the real barrier had never been opportunity, maybe it had been her own willingness to take a risk. Claire pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the back of the card. It rang twice before Richard's familiar voice answered. "I was hoping you'd call quickly," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Before I lose my nerve," Claire admitted. "Yes. I'll do it. I'll take the job." "Excellent." The relief and satisfaction in his voice were unmistakable. "We'll need to discuss details, of course. Salary, relocation assistance, timeline." "But Claire." "Yes. Thank you. For correcting my French, for listening to my story, for taking a chance on something new. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary." As Claire ended the call, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of possibility, the excitement of stepping into an unknown future. She looked around the cafe one more time, seeing it now as a chapter ending rather than a permanent destination. Later that evening, as she walked home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, Claire thought about coincidences and connections, about the power of small moments to change everything. A simple correction in French had bridged two worlds, brought together a grieving billionaire and a dreaming waitress, and set in motion a story neither of them could have predicted. In 6 weeks, she would be in Paris, working in languages she loved, helping build bridges between cultures and corporations. She would discover that Richard was not just a demanding boss but a loyal friend, someone whose wounded heart was slowly learning to heal through work that honored his mother's memory. They would travel together to conferences in Rome and Madrid, to meetings in Tokyo and Sao Paulo, building not just business relationships but a partnership founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. But all of that was still to come. Tonight, Claire simply walked through her neighborhood with Richard's business card in her pocket and the taste of possibility on her lips. She thought about Marguerite Dubois, the French seamstress who had believed in signs and connections, who had seen magic in ordinary things. Perhaps she had been right. Perhaps a chance encounter in a cafe, a gentle correction offered with kindness, the courage to speak up and the wisdom to listen, perhaps these small acts of humanity were where all the real magic lived. As she reached her apartment building, Claire smiled and whispered a few words in French to the evening air, her pronunciation perfect and her heart full of gratitude for the mysterious ways that life can surprise us, challenge us, and ultimately transform us into the people we're meant to become. The story of the waitress and the billionaire had begun with a simple correction and ended with two lives forever changed by the courage to be authentic, the power of compassion, and the remarkable things that can happen when we dare to speak up with kindness in our hearts.